love lifted me. Let's sing. I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry. From the waters lifted me, now safe am I. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. All my heart to Him I give, ever to Him I cling. In His blessed presence live, ever His praises sing. Love so mighty and so true, merits my soul's best songs. Faithful loving service to Him belongs. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. So the danger look above, Jesus completely saves. He will lift you by His love out of the angry waves. He's the master of the sea, billows His will obey. He, your Savior, wants to be saved today. Love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me, love lifted me, love lifted me. When nothing else could help, love lifted me. Page 469, 469. Encamped along the hills of light, the Christian soldiers rise, and press the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe and bells below, let all our strength be heard. Faith is the victory we know, that overcomes the world. Faith is a victory, faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. His banner over us is love, our sword the word of God. We tread the road the saints above, with shouts of triumph trod. By faith they like a whirlwind's breath, swept over every field. The faith by which they conquered death is still our shining shield. Faith is a victory, faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. To Him that overcomes the foe, what raiment shall we give? Before the angels we shall know His name confessed in heaven. Then onward from the hills of light, our hearts with love aflame, we'll banquet is a victory. Faith is a victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world.
Please mark your songbook page 912. 912 is Song After Blessings. Good evening.
So Daniel chapter 5 is where we're at, and it's an interesting thing. Some questions that come up within it, and part of it comes from the question is historical questions as far as, especially with Belshazzar. Here's a thing, first of all, as students of the Bible and believers of the Bible, we seldom have the questions, but those outside, the skeptics sometimes will bring up things, and it's easy to say, well, God said it, therefore we accept it. It's kind of like when we do that, and we should realize this, it's kind of like when you're talking to your children, you say, I'm the father and I said so. That is good for a 3-year-old sometimes, or a 5-year-old. What happens when you get to a 15-year-old?
You gotta talk afterwards.
You gotta talk afterwards. They gotta have some understanding, because they're just gonna, that's not gonna fly. Okay, yeah, you're the dad, you said so, and I'm the kid, and so I may take it, I may leave it, unless you explain it to me. You know, we start getting that. So the skeptic is not going to accept that. And so one of the first things we want to look at, we're going to do, is who Belshazzar is, and come to an understanding of some things, which isn't that hard to explain. Some of it is, some of it isn't. Some of it takes a little more detail. Some of it is, thankfully, that it has came through a historical reference now. And that's the thing about constant looking, especially in archaeologists. Okay? Now, here it says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple. We'll stop there just for a second. What does father mean?
Not necessarily his own father.
Right. A lot of times we want to do this. We say, okay, well, that was his father. That's a direct descendant. Or not a direct descendant, but a son. Immediately his son. But the Bible and the Hebrew doesn't always do this. And here we want to think about one thing. Who was the book of Daniel written for? Primarily.
Well, he was told to seal it up. So it was the kind of the Jews that were in that suspended time between Malachi and John.
Yeah, it was a testimony to them. It was a point of that. It was written particularly to them. Later, it becomes available to everyone, but primarily, and that's what we want to look at. So when Daniel is recording these things, it is giving a record to the Jewish nation so that they can understand later on the things that were going on. That's the primary point. Now, here his father. Who was Jesus the son of? Son of David. How many generations were there? All around 14, I believe. 14 or more. 20. A lot.
14 to the.
Yeah, it was Abraham. Abraham to David was 14. David to Babylon, carrying away Babylon was 14, and then from Babylon carrying away to Jesus was 14, as Matthew recorded.
I think they counted maybe one.
They skipped a couple here and there, and primarily, but in going through all the historical and everything, we have sorted it all out. But if we wanted to, and what it comes back to is what we really want to understand is that when someone says his father Nebuchadnezzar, that means that he's a descendant somehow of Nebuchadnezzar's. Now, there is more to be said about it, and we should understand that. We're going to look at it. But at this point here, the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lord, now notice this, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. This comes important later to recognize that his wives and his concubines are already at this feast. Okay? Because that's something to remember here in a bit. Now, here's the thing about Belshazzar. Here is what we have as the historical kings recorded of Babylon. Nabopolassar was the conqueror of Syrians. This was Nebuchadnezzar's biological father. Okay? And he, somebody said, about 612 BC. Now Nebuchadnezzar came to rule approximately 605 BC to 561. This would have been about the time of the carrying away. Evil Murdoch, which was his son, was approximately 561 to 557 BC, 4 years. And he was assassinated by his brother-in-law, Nerglissar, in order for him to seize power, and he ruled for about 4 years. And he was assassinated. Then his son, later, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that, ruled about 9 months. And then he was assassinated, and the people instituted this Nabonidus, who had been a Babylonian priest. And he ruled for about 15 to 16 years as king. Okay? Now, this gets important too when we start thinking about Daniel. Where was Daniel when we last saw him in chapter 4 under Nebuchadnezzar? And this will get brought up later in the chapter. He was in the king's court. He was the head of all the astrologers and everything. I think it was both. Now, I put Nabonidus back in there because Belshazzar is actually a son of Nabonidus, and he's believed to be, and you get two schools of thoughts on it, is either he was married to the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and he made, Nabonidus was, and so there is Belshazzar, a direct of Nebuchadnezzar, as a grandson. Okay? And he is made co-regent with Nabonidus. And this bore out in around 1911. There was found an inscription in which he named Belshazzar as his firstborn son. Okay? The queen mother She's mentioned as queen in 5:11, and we'll show why it looks to be that she is more the queen mother when we get there. So in Ezer is Nabonidus, and his wife is his mother, was a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, which looks that way. Or he was a son of evil Merodach, who was adopted by Nabonidus. Now remember, Nabonidus was one of the high priests of the Babylonian god, and he had served some years under Nebuchadnezzar as well as evil Merodach. So his loyalties went back to that direction. And that's one reason they made him king, was to try and bring back the kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar had had, the rule that he had, the glory that had been there before in the kingdom. Okay? So as we establish that, look at a couple of things. Evil Merodach. Now it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, released Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. He spoke kindly to him and gave him more prominent seat than those of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed his prison garments. He ate bread regularly before the king all the days of his life. Now, when you go back into Kings, and Nebuchadnezzar takes Jehoiakim to Babylon after blinding him, he puts him in the dungeon. He puts him into prison. And then about the time Nebuchadnezzar dies, Jehoiakim comes to reign, he brings him out. Many scholars believe this has from the bearing of what we read on chapter 4 concerning Nebuchadnezzar looking toward the Hebrew God, the God Most High, so that his son reflected that and chose to show favorably to Jehoiakim, hoping it would show favor to God himself in doing so. And we have that recorded. Now, Jeremiah records in chapter 27, verses 6 and 7, and now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and the beasts of the field I have also given to serve him. So all nations shall serve him and his son and his son's son, until the time of his land comes, and then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. So here is the point of the Babylonian nations. God speaking concerning Nebuchadnezzar, going on to when? His son and his son's son, grandson. Okay? And notice until the time of his land comes, till the point of it. And then many nations, great kings, shall make him serve them. So that kingdom will then be in turn serving someone else when that kingdom comes to an end. So it points to that point, fits in with everything that we're studying here. So here is where the transgression begins. That's verses 3 and 4. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and concubines drank from them. So not just Belshazzar drank from it, he started it, he drank from them in front of them. But now notice, his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them as well. How had Nebuchadnezzar treated those things? Evidently kept them sealed away. Evidently, I wouldn't say he treated them as sacred, but he did treat them as something to be respected. Treated with respect. Even in the superstitious times, even though you had conquered a kingdom with another God, would you ever really want to take a chance on angering that God? You know, especially if you learned what Nebuchadnezzar did. And later on, that would even more so stand on. Notice they drank wine, and here's where they really get in trouble. Praise the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Who are they giving glory to? Everybody but God. So at that very same time, in the same hour, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Doesn't just see the writing, he saw the hand writing. And the king's countenance changed, and his thought troubled him, so that the joints of his hips were loosened, and his knees knocked against each other. How many of us could identify with that? And we're not even drunk. That would make me wonder what's going on. So the king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So the other point that people bring up was Belshazzar not really king. Well, this is where the point of being a co-regent. Historical records have bore out that Nabonidus was not even in Babylon at the time it fell, and that he was often off doing things, building gods to other temples, or temples to other gods, plundering. Some even say grave robbing. Some historical records have shown that he was raiding places of kings that were dead and things like that, trying to get money. So if, as he said, they would be the third ruler in the kingdom, that supports that. You would have Nabonidus, then you'd have Belshazzar, who was over the things of Babylon, then you would have whoever he appointed to be the third king, that third ruler. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled, his countenance was changed, and his lords were astonished. I think that the point of it is this could not read the writing is more of they couldn't gather why it was written that way. And that's how it made it impossible to do the interpretation. Because it bears out in the text that what we're going to see is actually written in Aramaic. In fact, the rest of this chapter is written in Aramaic. And I think that bears out important to understand. When Paul is on the road to Damascus in Acts chapter 9, Luke records that the men that were with him heard Jesus but saw no one. Paul would put it more in the in chapter 22 that they heard but did not understand. They heard the voice but did not understand what was being said. This is kind of that thing. You ever read something, you can say, I know the words, but it doesn't make sense. That I think it's more that way when we get to it. He's a little different from Nebuchadnezzar. I brought back the last verse and what Nebuchadnezzar wrote, or David, or I think I agree that Daniel recorded what Nebuchadnezzar said. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all of whose works are truth and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down. Nebuchadnezzar had to learn the hard way to a degree, but he was able to learn. Belshazzar was different. He had that prideful heart, more so. In verse 10, because Belshazzar cannot find anybody that can interpret these things. In fact, I think it's so his astonishment. Now we get mention of the queen. I want you to pay attention what the queen says, which I think indicates that she is the queen mother. Most scholars agree that she's probably the queen mother, the mother of Belshazzar, wife of Babonius. And seems to be an eyewitness of the things she says. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. You know that she wasn't one of his wives, she wasn't there. His wives were there. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. Notice something else. She didn't ask permission to enter. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods. Interesting note that the word here is actually the Hebrew word for God, Elohim, that plurality that's often used with God. Were found in him, and King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the musicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. Okay? That's the interesting thing. Belshazzar seems not know who Daniel is. Doesn't seem to know anything about Daniel. But yet, she does. If she was the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, she could have been a witness to everything that we read from 2 to 5, even chapter 3. And talking concerning Daniel, would have known everything about him. And some say, well, where was Daniel if he had been chief of the musicians? Some of the skeptics. Well, you have evil Murdoch get killed somewhere. Daniel gets shuffled away. He's still there. He's still doing what he had been doing, except he's no longer that chief of the musicians. And he's an old man, and that's what some say. Belshazzar may have just seen him and took him as just being an old man. And that's the other point. And plus, you have a new king who is a high priest of the gods of Babylon. How much use is he going to have of somebody like Daniel that serves the God of Israel? He's going to kind of he gets shuffled away, and it's probably a good thing. It's probably a providence for his own well-being and to get to this point. Now, notice, inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar. So not only does she know the name that the Babylonian name that Nebuchadnezzar gave him, she knows that his actual Hebrew name is Daniel. And points it out. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. How many dreams do we have Daniel interpreting for Nebuchadnezzar? 2 is what we have recorded. But notice what she says concerning him. There's probably a lot more that we don't know about. Excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in Daniel. So while he was serving under Nebuchadnezzar, evidently there was a lot of things that came up that he explained. And God said, these are the ones we need. These are the ones people need. Okay? So she says, call for him. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, are you that Daniel who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you, like tonight, almost. I've heard of you that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought before me that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, that they could not give the interpretation of the thing. So here is what he's saying. Are you that Daniel? Are you the one I've heard? And he goes on again, and I've heard of you that you can give interpretation and explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, oh, I guess I cut it off. Verse of that. Verse 16. Fortunately, I have it here somewhere. Because it says about.
That you should be clothed in purple.
Clothed in purple.
And have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler of the kingdom. So that's the reward he offered to everybody that can interpret.
Right, and so he's still offering that same reward to him. Now Daniel's response was, let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Well, I didn't come here to become third ruler of the kingdom. And I'm not doing it for that. Notice, yet I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation.
He didn't want anything.
I don't want anything. I'm not here to gain anything. And then it's interesting what he does. And it's kind of that point of the way he starts to answer the king is in rebuke. As if God says, here's what you're to say. Because what he says explains the reason for the writing. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory, and honor. Now, who gave it to him, according to Daniel? God. When you read chapter 4 and get to the end of it, who gave it to Nebuchadnezzar? Who does Nebuchadnezzar say gave him that kingdom? God. Starts out thinking he did it on his own, but he gets in there. So he recounts, and because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. What is it Daniel saying concerning the kingdom that God gave Nebuchadnezzar? Who did Nebuchadnezzar answer to on this earth? No one. No one. Now, no. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened and proud, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like a beast, and his dwellings was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen. His body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules of the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. So Daniel just gave the short version of chapter 4. Okay? And it says it. He was there till he knew that the Most High God rules. But you, his son Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. Even as a grandson, and this being about 8 to 10 years after Nebuchadnezzar, roughly, maybe 10 to 15 years after this happened, he knew what happened. Remember, chapter 4 is actually a decree written by Nebuchadnezzar to the Babylonian people. Which means it would have been to him. And so, knowing how Nebuchadnezzar turned to serving God, he did not. That's why Kaufman and others say that even Murdoch brought Jehoiakim out of prison because he saw where Nebuchadnezzar turned to serving God and felt that it would be good to treat him with more honor and respect than he had been. Now notice, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord. They have brought out the vessels of his house before you, and you, your wives, your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear Or no, it's a little bit like Romans chapter 1, doesn't it? Chapter 18, Paul. And the God who knows your breath, holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. So you took these things created by God and you have called them gods and worship them, but the actual God who you know through Nebuchadnezzar gives the kingdoms of men to whom he chooses, you have not glorified. In fact, he's really dishonored him. It's he's gone beyond not giving God the glory to the point that he is actually, by taking the vessels that were from what was to be his temple and drinking them, dishonored him, insulted him. Now he says, then the fingers of the hand were sent from him. Okay, those fingers you saw, they're from him. And this writing was written, and this inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And notice, he goes and he says, this is the interpretation of each word, Mene. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. The word Mene in Aramaic literally means number, to number. So the emphasis is made in Mene, Mene, to number. Where your kingdom has been numbered and it's coming to an end. Tekel, which literally means scales, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Make sure I got that right. Scales, okay. Yeah. You've been weighed in the balances and found the wanting. So, what does that mean? You're not measuring up. You ever use a scale? We got the old Lady Justice supposed to have the scale. When I was first out of high school, I worked for Napa, and I used to mix paint. And we had a scale, and you'd put your can on them that you're pouring the paint different colors into, and you put weights on the other side, and you would sit there and measure it out, sometimes in grams. You put a little bit in, put a little more in it, you add usually a starter color. But then you did that until it balanced out. Well, until you actually got that can to going down to where it's supposed to be, it was wanting. That's what it means. It was on the low side. You're coming up short. And that's what comes down to it. And then Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Upshern is what he reads. Perez is that. Upshern is that plural of Perez, which means to divide. So your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. It's an interesting thing. When God says something's going to happen, it eventually happens. Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, what did Nebuchadnezzar see?
The giant with gold, bronze, silver, bronze.
Yeah, head of gold, shoulders of silver, belt of bronze, and then legs of iron, and then iron and clay mixed together. And Daniel would go on later to tell him that it was going to be the Persians. We see it that way. We can understand it. Here he's told. Now Belshazzar was true to his word. Got to give him credit for that, because a lot of people get angry and say, "Oh, I'm not going to accept this view." In fact, how many times do we see that with people in the Bible? About old Pharaoh, Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck, made a proclamation concerning him that he would be the third ruler in the kingdom. How long would he reign?
Till morning.
Not till morning. In fact, he probably wasn't doing it in service. He's probably putting his life in danger. So that very night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was slain. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. It's recorded that that same night, when it fell, historically, that Cyrus and his armies were already advancing on Babylon through the aqueduct. What they had done, they had diverted the river, built the dam, diverted it, and used the channel to go under the wall and come into Babylon and conquer it. And that's important. Once when we look at prophecies, there are prophecies given that are going to take some time to complete. And then there are prophecies given that are immediate. Daniel gave him the prophecy that night, and it took place that night. I doubt Belshazzar thought it was going to be that quick. And surely if Nabonius had known that Cyrus was planning to attack Babylon, he would have came home. But when God decides judgment's going to come, that judgment comes. He foretold that Babylon would fall in Jeremiah 51. He even said if they had occurred, they would have healed them. It's interesting. God tells Hezekiah in Isaiah 39 that the spies he led into Babylon would end up being how Judah would fall, but that it would be after his death. He had already foretold that Josiah would lay waste to that altar of Jeroboam's in 2 Kings chapter 13, or 1 Kings chapter 13, which Josiah does before he dies. Josiah being Hezekiah's great-grandson. But then when Josiah dies, and all the reforms that he made are done away with, Judah falls. Nebuchadnezzar tries to serve God the last years of his life. Is nearing the end of the captivity. It appears that evil Murdoch tried to do the same thing and at least treated the Jews well, probably Jehoiakim. But yet when he dies, the kingdom falls into array very quickly. And Nebuchadnezzar's own grandson goes back to serving those false gods. And God brings that destruction and brings into power Cyrus, who he named by Isaiah, would return to his people. Yes, sir.
There was another kind of interesting story within that too. There was a controversy between Jeremiah and Ezekiel because Ezekiel said, or one of them said, I tried to look it back if I could find it. One of them said that Jehoiachin would never see Babylon, and the other one said Jehoiachin would be taken captive and go to Babylon. So the Jews said, well, they can't be both, but
Yes,
he
it
did
did.
go to Babylon, but he never saw it because he got blinded.
Right. So the last thing he saw, they both were right, and that comes back to that point is where we have to take the two things and put them together, put them into harmony. Because in one definition, as he said, he would never see Babylon, didn't mean that he'd never get there. Just meant he wouldn't see it. And the last thing that he saw, and that always struck me, was the last thing Nebuchadnezzar let him see was his own sons being killed. So that would be the last memory that he had of his eyesight. And that tells you how cruel Nebuchadnezzar could be. And then rather than kill him, puts him into a dungeon. So he has to live with that. But yeah, you're right. Both are right. Both Jeremiah and Ezekiel are right. He never saw Babylon, but he was taken to Babylon. He was captive in Babylon. And so God shows that no matter what the wording is, it's still true. We just have to sometimes be willing to put it into harmony. And when we get it wrong, it's not the word that's wrong, it's us. Yes, sir.
Studying about all that stuff, it seems to me that while God was to some degree involved in human government, in nations and things, all down through the ages, that he was more involved with those that were directly connected to with the eventual introduction of Jesus Christ into the world. Because I'm talking about you never read about nations in Africa, China, and all this. Most of them are Jewish related.
And they are, and you know, that is the thing, because the Old Testament history that we have, and you're right, is centered around almost showing that Jesus Christ is to come into the world. Primarily Jews, and it was primarily written, the prophets and everything, to show that that was true. But at the same time, it's shown to say these things, here God's taking the time to say, this kingdom just didn't come up by chance. I brought it up. And so when you see this next one coming, I brought it up. You know, Washington had that attitude about God. He believed this country came together and became what it was because God had decided for it to. Whereas Jefferson was more, well, things were kind of wound up and God doesn't get involved anymore. But Washington truly believed in the intervention of God. And so Daniel actually says that we have people in the church today that will tell you that God doesn't care about politics. God doesn't care who's in the government. God doesn't care about that. Doesn't care how you vote, what you do in that aspect. I'm of a completely different mind on that. Yeah, Romans 13 says you're supposed to give honor to the king, even if he's one you don't like. You got to at least respect the office and respect the God that God put him there. Now, you might do like I do sometimes, say, God, why him? But evidently there's a reason behind it. We just have to realize that.
Just like here, his reason for doing things didn't show up for another
Right.
500,000 years later. You know, it's kind of, it was, and then it took place, God took care of it, but it was aligning things so that later on down the road, you get what God intended.
And that's right.
We don't know that. You know, we don't know what our future is because we don't know what God's intentions are 100 years from now, 5
Right.
years from now, or what it's going to bring about.
It's kind of that point. You can go into Kings. God tells certain kings go and do something, and it comes true right then. Something that he said years before will come true. But Daniel's one of those few books that here's a prophecy given in chapter 2, and roughly 60, 70 years later, here it is coming true.
It's really just the first part.
Just the first part of it. Yeah, just that this kingdom's going to come up after your kingdom. But enough to sit there to say, well, if that was going to come true, why wouldn't we believe the other one? And it gets even more involved in the next the rest of the chapters of Daniel are really just chapters of prophecy. Well, I take that back. The next chapter has to do with Daniel being lifted up under the Medes into serving. But after that, 7 on through 9 are prophecies, some of which were able to be seen soon, but not in Daniel's lifetime. This one is affirmed in Daniel's lifetime. And one of the prophecies would not be fulfilled until the crucifixion of Jesus. And so that aspect of it, and that's one reason for the Jews, so that they could see that. And part of it is even fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus makes that affirmation, when you see the days of desolation as written in Daniel. In Matthew 24. Pointing, I believe it's to chapter 9. So it's important because what does the skeptic say today? I know Jesus said he was coming again, where's he at? They were even doing that in the time of Peter. Well, what were the people doing when John the Baptist started preaching? They were crying for a prophet. It had been over 400 years since they had heard a prophet. They were crying for a prophet. And God brought forth the prophet. So that time is coming. We just don't know when. God fulfills things in God's time. And that's important. Those short ones remind us that it will take. And those long ones that we see fulfilled show us that it will come true. Everything that God has ever said has or will come true. And we have that promise and that hope.
That time frame that he has out there, then becoming complacent and losing heart. That's having that time frame can go against us if we don't.
Yeah. It can go against us if we can let it become complacent. And we can sit there, and that's part of the example of Belshazzar. Look at the difference between Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar turned to trying to serve God. That's the last thing we know about it, that he was trying to serve God. Even Daniel says that when he's talking about to Belshazzar. But Belshazzar, on the other hand, is that's kind of the attitude he had. What did Nebuchadnezzar know?
Our God can give him more time, so I appreciate God saw that he wasn't gonna.
Yeah. God saw that it is.
Turn, so let's get rid of this one and we'll move on.
Yeah, it's time for Cyrus to take place, to come about. It's time for the Persians to come up. And if Belshazzar would have repented, he probably would have gave him at least a few more months. But that realization that it wasn't going to matter what he did. And sometimes we have to realize that. Brother B.C. Carr talked about a man that had a heart attack. I think I told y'all about this before. And was a member of church, he baptized and everything. And he asked his wife to ask Brother Carr to come see him and to pray for him. And when he was there, he promised Brother Carr, if you'll pray for me and God gets me out of this hospital, I'll be baptized. I'll be coming to church. Well, he got out, Brother Carr prayed for him. He got out of the hospital. Brother Carr went to see him several times. Oh, I'm not ready. I'm not strong enough, man. I'm not ready to back at work and things, but I'm not strong enough yet to be coming to church. 6 months later, another heart attack. Same promises. Brother Carr prayed for him. About 2 days later, he died. Brother Carr's decision was, God knew the first time he wasn't really promising to obey. Brother Carr just had to see it. He had to come to an understanding of it so that he wasn't asking why. And when at the funeral, when he talked to his wife and went to see her, get ready to do the funeral, and told her that he's very sorry She actually told him, she says, I didn't believe him the first time. Better take it when you get the opportunity. May not get another one. Let's stand and sing.
Days are filled. We'll have there. Yeah, there. Days are filled with sorrow and care, hearts are lonely and drear. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Jesus is very near. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Calvary, Calvary. Burdens are lifted at Calvary, Jesus is very near.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Anything else need to be said? Brother Russell, would you just listen,
Almighty God, our Father in heaven, thank you so much for many wonderful blessings that you bestow upon us every day, 24 hours a day. We're thankful, Father, that we have the opportunity